like to call to order this regular session of the Bloomington Common Council for Wednesday, November 6, 2024. Will the clerk please call the roll?
Councilmember Flaherty.
Here.
Ruff.
Here.
Piedmont Smith.
Here.
Stossberg.
Here.
Rosenbarger.
Here.
And Daly.
Here.
Thank you.
Thank you. I'd like to read this land and labor acknowledgement for the city of Bloomington. We recognize that the city sits on native land. Bloomington, as well as the city administrative buildings, are on the traditional homelands of the Miami, Delaware, Potawatomi, and Shawnee people, and we acknowledge they are past, present, and future caretakers of this land. We also acknowledge that much of the economic progress and development in Indiana, and specifically Bloomington, resulted from the unpaid labor and forced servitude of people of color, specifically enslaved African labor. We acknowledge that this land remains home to and a site of gathering and healing for many indigenous and other people of color, and we commit to the work necessary to create and promote a more equitable and just Bloomington. We move forward knowing and acknowledging our rich, complicated, and sometimes painful past so that we can learn from it and create a true land of opportunity. To summarize our agenda tonight, we will have approval of minutes from 3 different regular sessions of the council. Then we will move to reports. First, reports from council members. Then we will have a report from Canopy Bloomington. Then we will move on to any reports from council committees, if we have them. And then reports from the public, and that is the first opportunity of 2 for members of the public to comment on items that are not on the agenda. We then will move on to appointments to boards and commissions, and then legislation for first readings. And there we have Ordinance 2024-24 to authorize the issuance of the City of Bloomington, Indiana General Obligation Bonds, Series 2024, for the purpose of providing funds to pay for certain capital projects of the city and expenses incurred in connection with the issuance of the bonds. Then we will move on to legislation for second readings and resolutions, where we will have Resolution 2024-22 to approve an update to the City of Bloomington's Americans with Disabilities Act Transition Plan. Resolution 2024-21, a resolution of the Common Council of the City of Bloomington rejecting the establishment of a merit system for the Bloomington Police Department. And Ordinance 2024-23 to amend Title 15 of the Bloomington Municipal Code entitled Vehicles and Traffic regarding amending Section 15.12.010 stop intersections to remove 1 stop intersection on 7th Street from Schedule A and add 1 multi-stop intersection on 7th Street to Schedule B. So that's involving stop signs. Then we will have an additional period of public comment on items not on the agenda. We'll discuss the council schedule if there's anything to update there, and then we will adjourn. All right, so we're ready for approval of minutes.
I'd like to approve the minutes from June 12th, 2024 as presented in the original packet, and the ones from August 21st, 2024 and October 16th, 2024 as were sent to us with slight corrections this afternoon.
Second.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded that June 12th, August 21st, and October 16th meeting minutes be approved. The latter 2 were slightly revised today. All in favor, or is there any discussion?
Wait, just that we're in the roll call vote.
Thank you. Oh, Councilmember Asari has joined us. So we will do a roll call vote, please. Clerk Bolden.
Councilmember Flaherty.
Yes.
Ruff.
Yes.
Piedmont Smith.
Yes.
Stossberg.
Yes.
Asari.
Yes.
Rosenbarger.
Yes.
And Daly.
Yes.
Thanks.
Those minutes are approved. Next, we will move on to reports, and we'll start with reports from council members. I will begin on my left. Councilmember Daly, do you have a report this evening?
I do. Thank you very much. I would just like to announce that I'm going to be holding a constituent meeting. I just planned it, so it's not on the website yet, but I will get that on there. But it's going to be on November 14th, which is a Thursday, from 4:30 to 5:30. That's going to be at the downtown Monroe County Public Library in meeting room 2A, which is on the upstairs past all of the DVDs. This is a wonderful opportunity for you to come and sit and chat with me, ask me any questions about anything we've been working on, or to talk to me about what you see going on, or just to get to know me. So I hope that somebody will come by and hang out with me during that time. And it doesn't have to be just my constituents. Anybody is welcome. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Rosenbarger.
No report, thank you.
Councilmember Asare, do you have a report this evening?
Yes, good evening, everyone. Just a very quick one that for my fellow council members, as you all remember, we submitted that letter of support for the establishment of a EDD zone between 3 counties. And we just got word this morning that Governor Holcomb has also provided a letter of support for it. So that is progressing as was expected. Obviously, we still haven't heard back or submitted, I don't think, the next steps to the EDA, but just wanted to let everyone know that there has been some progress towards that. So that is by way of my updates.
Thank you. Councilmember Stossberg?
I don't have a report this evening, but I do have a motion to allow our council attorney to address the litigation. So I would like to move to authorize that the council administrator attorney be able to represent, defend, and act on behalf of Common Council in all aspects of litigation, including but not limited to preparing and filing pleadings, engaging in discovery, entering into settlement negotiations, appearing and arguing in court, communicating with opposing parties, and taking other appropriate action in the discretion of the attorney, and also to communicate with the council president regarding such litigation at the discretion of the attorney, in addition to periodically reporting to council.
There's a motion on the table. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you. Any questions on the motion or comments? All right. Clerk Bolden, will you please call the roll on the motion to authorize the council administrator attorney as was outlined?
Councilmember Ruff.
Yes.
Piedmont Smith.
Yes.
Stossberg.
Yes.
Asari.
Yes.
Rosenbarger.
Yes.
Daly.
Yes.
And Flaherty.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you. That motion passes.
Thank you. And just as a note, Clerk Bolden, I'll send you the text of that motion right now. Thank you.
All right. On my right, Councilmember Flaherty, do you have a report?
I do, thank you. Beyond this statement, I don't want to dwell on this subject, but for several reasons, as I'll describe, I do feel it necessary to follow up about the deputy mayor's behavior from last week, through which she violated our rules of order by attacking the character of council members and questioning their motives. So I did call the deputy mayor to order at that moment, briefly explaining her violation of the rules and also speaking on it as a matter of personal privilege. But ideally, the chair or the parliamentarian would call out this behavior, though I understand that is often hard to do in the moment. That's part of why I'm following up this evening, because it was a pretty serious violation of our rules of order, and I think it's important that we all know and have a common understanding of what Robert's Rules says about such behavior. Specifically, Robert's Rules speaks to the topic of motive in 3 places: Section 4, the handling of a motion; Section 43, rules governing debate; and Section 61, discipline of members and guests. Generally, these rules do also apply to participants other than council members speaking during our meetings, and perhaps especially so when the administration is using public comment to functionally engage in debate on the merits of legislation, as the deputy mayor was last week. So in Section 4, Roberts says, quote, "Debate must be confined to the merits of the pending question. To this end, speakers must never attack or make any allusion to the motives of members." In Section 43, Roberts says, quote, When a question is pending, a member can condemn the nature or likely consequences of the proposed measures in strong terms, but they must avoid personalities, and under no circumstances can they attack or question the motives of another member. Finally, in Section 61, Roberts discusses various levels of infractions and possible action to follow. For example, with a slight breach of order, such as addressing a council member instead of the chair may simply point out the fault and advise the person to avoid it in the future. But in the case of more serious offenses, such as attacking and questioning the motives of a council member, which is a specific example cited by Roberts as a more serious offense, in the first instance, it is typically, although not necessarily, adequate to merely call the person to order and direct them to be seated. However, depending on the severity of the infraction, and especially in the case of repeated violations, the chair may, quote, name the offender, making a declaration for the meeting minutes about the nature of the repeated breach of order. Additionally, at the discretion of the council via motion, a penalty such as removal from the chambers or requiring an apology can be directed. And the reason, finally, I thought it important to cover all of this is because, based on the deputy mayor's remarks to the local newspaper following the incident, it's not at all clear to me that she understands that what she did was a problem or that it won't happen again. If this does happen a second time, I think we as a body should not only call the behavior to order, but also consider appropriate penalties as outlined in Robert's rules. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Ruff, do you have a report?
No report tonight, thank you.
Thank you, and I also have no report this evening. So let us move on to the report from Canopy Bloomington about their work in our community regarding trees. Welcome. If you could keep your presentation to 10 minutes, that way we would have plenty of time for questions.
Yep. Oh, thank you.
Good evening. My name is Philippa Guthrie. I know some of you, and I'm the president of Canopy Bloomington. Thank you for setting aside the time for us tonight. We partner with the city of Bloomington on tree issues and tree planting, and we wanted to introduce ourselves tonight, and thank you. You have supported Canopy Bloomington and the city's efforts to enhance and maintain our tree canopy. Clicker, I should figure out how this works. There we go. So we are a nonprofit social impact organization created to maximize Bloomington's tree canopy and sustainably manage our urban forest for all of the benefits that trees provide. We were created in 2021, so we are fairly new. We engage with the Bloomington community in plantings and caring for our urban forest, as well as other things which I will discuss in a minute, to build a resilient community for all. There are 4 of us here tonight and 2 children of one of us. Sarah Mincy, she is a professor at SPIA and an urban tree expert. Ava Hartman, our executive director, and she is a graduate of IU in biology and SPIA and has other trainings. And she does most of the work of our organization. We all contribute, but she's a real workhorse. And John Vickers, who is our community engagement specialist, he's our newest hire, and you may know his name. He was previously the director of the IU Cinema, but he has been working for a number of years in the environmental issues and planting and all kinds of things here in Bloomington. So canopy programming, we have 3 basic pillars: education, tree planting, and community engagement. The education things that we engage in, Trees 101 is a course that we offer. We've had one of them so far, and it was developed by one of our board members, and it was very successful. A number of people signed up, so we will be having other ones. It's all about trees, how to plant them, why they are beneficial, and about Bloomington's canopy. Tree walks, that is offered on our website, and those involve either a staff member or volunteers taking people around and showing them about trees. We've had several of those in parks, for example, or an area where there are lots of varieties of trees so that people are learning about the different kinds of trees. Tree workshops would be when people ask us to teach them how to care for their trees. The Youth Tree Tenders program is one of the things that we partner with the city on. We have done it for, I think, 3 years, and it involves hiring high school students to work in, it has been city parks so far, and they work part-time in the summer, and they do mulching and pruning and what are the other things they do? Well, Ava knows more, but they take care of the trees that are already planted and are sort of mid-age. And it's been really successful. They love it, and they've done a really good job, I think. And Bloomington, the city of Bloomington, funds that by a contract. Informational media, we did yard signs last year, actually, in the parks about how to mulch your trees, and it's a donut and not a mound of mulch. And we also do social media posts about trees, and we have handouts that we provide. Tree planting, that is probably our main pillar, really, I would say. I mean, we were established to plant trees. We have priority tree planting zones based on equity and community strategy and where trees are needed. We lead planting events in the spring and the fall, which are the seasons when you should plant trees. Community is the third pillar, although it kind of runs through all of it. We build relationships with community partners, and you see a list of them there. It's the city, MCCSC, the neighborhoods. Kona has been really helpful. Habitat for Humanity, and other organizations. So the city has lost canopy cover. From 1998 to 2018, it was 54%, which is it's really shocking. The tree canopy coverage as of 2018 is 38%, but our attainable canopy is 61%. 23% of our area is available to plant, and that's across both private and public land. 16% is designated as high or very high priority for plantings. Most of the decrease over the last decade has been on private land. And the forecast for the next 30 years is that 5% of Bloomington's canopy will be lost by 2048. 5% of Bloomington's canopy is equivalent to about 4.5 times the size of Switchyard Park. So since our founding, we have planted 241 trees, and you can see the neighborhoods that we have planted in and the other organizations. So you can see the list of neighborhoods, and those are organized. We do the public engagement or the community engagement. We meet with the neighborhood, ask who wants trees, and then the residents who want the trees actually engage in the plantings with us. It's a lot of fun. It involves whole families. 5 schools that we have partnered with, and then not-for-profits, including churches and other organizations. These are just a few pictures from our plantings, and you can see they engage all ages. There are often kids there, and they really love it. They're just a lot of fun. And this is for the neighborhoods, 2 of the neighborhoods and 2 schools. No, 1 school and a church. This is more about the Youth Tree Tender Summer Program. And this is, again, a partnership with the City of Bloomington, and it is professional development. It's not just having them plant trees. We offer workshops to them on resume writing and skills building and things like that. There's the list of things that we do: watering, mulching, and it was 200 park trees for over the past 3 years. The Cool Corridor planting, we're engaging in project, the phase 1 of the project. This is again with this is with ESD at the city. And our partnership will be conducting community engagement, hosting a tree planting, and executing a maintenance plan. And this is in the Crestmont and Walnut Woods neighborhoods. These are the cool corridors is areas of the city corridors that are heat, susceptible to heat and have very little tree canopy. So that's the concept, is to partner and get those in better shape. Partner tree plantings, again, we partner with the City of Bloomington Parks, and this is increasing. They have partnered with us in neighborhoods, so they would plant, the city plants in the right-of-way, and we plant on the private land. That's what we have, and we are here for questions if anyone has any.
Thank you very much, Ms. Guthrie. Are there any questions from council members regarding Canopy Bloomington? Councilmember Ruff.
Trees are not inexpensive. They're not cheap. Everything you get in the way of actual trees for planting are donated?
We have grants, for example, and they cover the costs of the trees. We do have donations in kind, I would say, from Bluestone is one of our biggest partners. They will store trees for us. Have I covered it? Yes, we do have donations as well, for more than just trees, but yes, we often use them for trees.
So, can I follow up with just a? So, do you have any fundraising solicitation type campaigns that you do just to raise funds, or?
We have private donors. We are working on expanding our ability to fundraise. To be honest, we're a new nonprofit, so we've been organizing and figuring out what we want to do as our mission and how we're going to fulfill that. So that's 3 pillars that we've developed. There's so much to do that we had to kind of prioritize. And so we do fundraising, but we don't do a lot of events. We approach people individually that have expressed interest. But we do plan to expand that. Right now, we have a grant from the Infrastructure Act through the state, and that is helping fund our administrative costs. And also, it's not for trees, actually. It's for expanding how we do maintenance. So the trees are funded from other grants, some of them local.
Well, thank you for this effort, this initiative. It's exciting. Just real quick, finally, was there any involvement with Canopy Bloomington after the recent storms that damaged so many trees for replacing any? I mean, I knew they'd be small compared to the things that fell, but it takes time for trees to grow.
Yeah, no, not really. Yes. Say
Could you
that louder.
repeat that, please, at the microphone?
Yeah, why don't you come up, Sarah?
So canopy cover assessments are costly, right? We have to
And
use.
Could you state your name? I'm sorry.
Sarah Mincy, Vice President for Canopy. We will do other canopy assessments in the future for the city, and as those come along, we'll be able to get new assessments of where we need to be working so we can prioritize spaces that have lost canopy cover from storm events like that. And, we've had a lot of change over time, as Philippa described, and some of that has been because of storms. Some of it has been because of emerald ash borer, right, invasive species. And then some of it is because of development, as we described. So we just continually look at these satellite images and update our analysis to know where we need to be working. But really importantly, I just want to emphasize a big focus is on equity. So we're looking at communities that have been marginalized, typically lower income communities where there's also low canopy cover, because the benefits to them can be really great.
Great. Well, thank you for your answers and thank you for your work.
Are there other questions from council members? Councilmember Osare.
Thank you so much, both for the wonderful presentation and the work that you're doing. I always make it a point to ask what this body can do if you to support what you're doing. And also, I would like to ask that again. What is it that we can do to support?
The city has provided so much support already, and we hope that will continue. But getting the word out, because we are newer, and we've been doing our work quietly and in, corridors and in communities within our community. So we really are just getting the word out. That's part of our education focus too. So anything you can do to help with that would be wonderful.
Great. Councilmember Strasburg?
Thank you. I'm looking at slide 6, where it has that map of the neighborhoods, and there are yellow, orange, and red neighborhoods. And I'm just wondering if somebody can explain the colors to me.
Yes. Hi, Ava Hartman, Executive Director of Canopy Bloomington. So there are 3 colors on the map, and they're based on priority areas. So the red priorities are the highest, the orange are medium, and then the yellow are low. So Canopy tends to plant we prioritize the highest priorities, and then sometimes we'll plant in medium priority. And then since we don't have the biggest capacity right now, the lowest priority neighborhoods will provide them with educational resources, but we don't do plantings in them.
So those priorities are based on the canopy
Yes.
coverage?
So they're based on a few environmental and socioeconomic variables. Some of the environmental variables include vulnerability to flooding, heat, temperature, looking at just like a bunch of different environmental variables. And then we also look at socioeconomic variables, so things like median income, race and ethnicity, and we basically piled all of those on top of each other, and that's how we got the map you're seeing.
I guess I'm just surprised by some of the colors based on what you're telling me the assessment was, but.
Yes, so we inform our plantings by this map, but we recognize that the data might not represent everything that's happening in the community, especially when things like storms go through. And so we've experienced things where we work with Habitat for Humanity, but their neighborhood isn't in a high priority area. So a lot of times we base our decisions off this data, but we also listen to community input.
Okay, thank you.
Yes.
Thank you. Any other questions from council members? Councilmember Rosenbarger.
Thank you. This is so neat. 2 questions. What kind of trees do you do? And do you plant fruit and nut trees? And then about how old are the trees that you're planting?
Yes, so we plant native trees to Indiana. We're planting species that are going to be resilient to climate change. And so far, we haven't planted fruit and nut trees, but we are hoping to expand that, especially when thinking about community members who might want those in their yards come next year. It's definitely something that we're looking at. And then I feel like you had another question that I did not answer.
How old are the trees that you're planting?
Yes, they tend to be like 4 or 5 years old. They're nursery grown, so when we get the trees, they're about as tall as I am.
And any final questions? Okay, well, thank you very much to everybody from Canopy for coming and informing us. All right, next on our agenda, let me get back to that. We have any reports from council committees this evening? Councilmember Strasburg.
In the absence of Councilmember Zulik this evening, I'll give a quick elected salary, the ad hoc elected official salary committee update. I don't remember if we've updated about this before, but we as a committee have engaged with Crow for Crow to provide kind of facilitation and conversation around what our priorities and values are related to setting those salaries. And so that is the update, and we have 2 meetings scheduled for that right now. They're actually tomorrow and Friday. They're both at 8:30 in the morning. They're, of course, public meetings. Anybody is welcome. They're in person only. Thursday is in the Hooker Conference Room, and Friday is in Allison Conference Room. So, and we're just kind of having those conversations to identify the priorities and what we think is important, and that's reflective both of what the members of the committee think, but also what we've also heard from other council members in terms of trying to make that, and Crow will give us kind of a conclusion deliverable about what our priorities are that then we'll end up bringing back to council at some point. Do we have any questions about that?
Any questions regarding the ad hoc committee on elected official salaries?
And do council members Flaherty or Rosenberger have anything to add?
I would just say anyone can come, but council members, if you do want to come to any of the meetings, right, you are welcome to come and chat about it, the process. Right?
Although we have to avoid a quorum of council members at these meetings. And the committee already has 4 members, right? So ask in advance if anybody else wants to come.
Get clarity on that, actually, from our, my impression is that it's a meeting of the committee, which requires a quorum to convene. It is a public meeting, and council members attending would be viewing. They would not be and participating as members of the public, so to speak. Like, it's not, it wouldn't be a council meeting, and therefore not. That's been my understanding always. Is that, I don't know, Attorney Lehner, is that your understanding?
You know, I'm not familiar with this particular committee. Could we talk afterwards, and then I could give you feedback
no problem
on that?
Thank you.
Thanks.
Yeah, it should be the same for any committee, so it would be good to know this for multiple use cases.
Sure.
Okay. All right.
I'll also say if anybody wants to share anything about particular value or whatever, you can forward that on to the committee.
Right. So the committee is council members Stossberg, Zulik, who's chair, Rosenbarger, and Flaherty. Thank you for your work. We will now go to public comment. So if any member of the public, Councilmember Asari, you had a question? Or?
We have mayoral report time. I can't see what's that. It's quite weird being online, by the way. I'm glad to have tried it, but I can't see who's in the room or what's going on.
Yes. So currently in Bloomington Municipal Code, we have a section of the agenda called Reports from the Mayor and City Offices. A few times this year, we have been approached, or we have approached ourselves, nonprofits who we want to hear from, and we didn't really have a place to put them in. They are entities that partner with the city, so we kind of put those under the report from the mayor and city offices. And if the mayor wants to make a report, she knows that that's something that should be notified to us ahead of time, and I did not know that.
I was just lost because I thought there was a thing. I thought there was an appointment thing, but I missed an email or something. I don't mean to cause disruption. Sorry, I was confused. So
That's all right. There was some back and forth on email about a matter under the heading of appointments to boards and commissions, and that comes a little bit later in the agenda. I hear from Mayor Thompson from the audience that she would like to make a comment. We have exceeded the 20 minutes for, we've actually moved on. We already had reports from council committees. That agenda item, reports from the mayor and city offices, was almost took up a whole 20 minutes. So I don't know if somebody wants to make a motion to make an exception, but at this point.
I make a motion to extend the time.
So to go back and allow the mayor to speak?
Yeah, to extend the time for mayor and city offices reports.
I think that because we've already moved on to the council committee reports, I think that we have to move to insert a new agenda item, perhaps.
I think that makes sense. You could amend the agenda to include this at this time.
Okay, sorry. I was like, how do we do that? I move to amend the agenda to insert a report from the mayor's office after council committees. Do I have to specify exactly where?
Okay, there's a motion. Is there a second?
I seconded it, I think, a minute ago.
All right, there's a motion and a second. Since we have Councilmember Osari remote, we do need to do a roll call vote on the motion. Clerk Bolden, could you please call the roll?
Yes, 1 second. Councilmember Piedmont Smith,
Yes.
Stossberg,
Yes.
Asari,
Yes.
Rosenbarger,
Yes.
Daley,
Yes.
Flaherty,
Yes.
Ruff.
Yes.
All right, the motion passes. So we will now allow the mayor a brief period to make a comment.
Thank you. I apologize if the request was not clear when I asked to give a report tonight. Did not mean to interrupt the meeting. I wanted to give you an update on the Historic Preservation Commission appointment. It is, as you know, my priority to look in a balanced way at how we diversify all of the voices in Bloomington that are coming to the table, ensuring that whenever possible, we have a good balance. And I think in light of where our nation is headed at the moment, that's especially important. I selected as my appointment the only non-white male that had applied to the HPC, and unfortunately, my original appointment and the only candidate of any diversity no longer wishes to be considered for this volunteer position, as the initial appointment process was unwelcoming. The HPC has the important job of preserving our history, but it also has the ability to delay or increase the cost of housing in our community, which is a priority I know that we all share. I will be working to find an appointment that can meet the needs of the city with as much diversity as possible, but unfortunately tonight I don't have an appointment to offer to you. To members of the public, I mostly wanted to use this time to let you know that if you're passionate about preserving our history and serving the public as a volunteer, I really encourage you to apply. Thanks so much for your time.
All right. Well, now we can move on to reports from the public. So this is a period of time when members of the public can address the council on matters that are not on the agenda. And you're limited to 3 minutes total. And we do ask that you both write your name if you're here in chambers and say your name, your full name, and then you would have up to 3 minutes. And if you're joining us on Zoom and would like to make a comment, you can use the raise hand function, which is usually found on the reactions button at the bottom of your screen. And if that doesn't work for some reason, then, okay, this is highly unusual that we have somebody approaching the dais with handouts. Those should be distributed before the meeting next time for everybody's information. So yes, if you're on Zoom, you can use the raise hand function and you'll be recognized by the meeting host. We'll start here in council chambers. Please state your full name and you'll have up to 3 minutes.
Excuse me. Good afternoon. My name is Joe Davis, and the documents I just handed out I'd like to be submitted to the record. They are an example of the ongoing harassment that I've been receiving from the city of Bloomington, from the executive branch, the Department of Public Works, and the Department of Parking Enforcement, and at any rate, I just received these this afternoon. If you look in the picture there, you can see a green item. That's my mortar mixer that I had to purchase back from JB Salvage after it was stolen from me by hand, and its third-party abatement contractor, the Fire Dogs, on the 22nd of October. Hand came in, tore down my fence, removed my fence, removed all of my personal possessions in my backyard, my sanctioned building materials and tools that were on top of my trucks and my 2 utility trailers and my utility van. They were stolen right off the beds of those licensed and registered Bureau of Motor Vehicles. And they took many of the things that were being held and incorporated into my current and construction project, which has a permit and also a certificate of zoning compliance. And now all of those things are in the landfill, except for the metal that was separated out by the Fire Dogs, and they sold it. So not only did they get paid, but they also sold my materials at the salvage yard. So anyway, luckily I was able to buy back my mortar mixer, all of my other solar equipment and aluminum for that project was baled and shipped out before I could get there to the salvage yard. But you'll see the green mortar mixer is there, and it cost me 30 cents a pound. So it was 650 pounds for a total of $195 it cost me to get that back. However, on Monday, the Board of Public Works approved a bill to be sent to me for $7,495.13 to pay for the theft of my own personal property. And it was approved. So I'm soon going to be receiving a bill for $7,450. And this is not right. This is harassment.
Mr. Davis, your time is up.
Thank you. And this is to be entered into the record, these documents. Thank you.
Is there anybody on Zoom who would like to make a comment? Ms. Williamson?
There are no hands raised.
Thank you. Anybody else in council chambers want to make a comment? Okay, so we will come back to the council for appointments to boards and commissions. I believe there was one to be made by Team A, or two, actually. Councilmember Stossberg.
I would like to move to appoint Corey Smith to seat C2 and Christopher Moore to seat C1 on the Commission on the Status of Black Males.
Is there a second?
Second.
All right, there are 2 seconds. Any questions, comments? Okay, it's been moved to appoint Corey Smith and Christopher Moore to the Commission on the Status of Black Males. Will the clerk please call the roll?
Yes, Councilmember Stossberg?
Yes.
Asari?
Yes.
Rosenbarger?
Yes.
Daley?
Yes.
Flaherty?
Yes.
Ruff?
Yes.
Piedmont Smith?
Yes. All right, so we appreciate those 2 residents being willing to serve. And we will move on to legislation for first readings.
I would like to move that ordinance 2024-24 be introduced and read by the clerk by title and synopsis only.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. Will the clerk please call the roll on the motion to introduce?
Councilmember Asari?
Yes.
Rosenbarger?
Yes.
Daley,
Yes.
Flaherty,
Yes.
Ruff,
Yes.
Piedmont Smith,
Yes.
Strasburg.
Yes.
Thank you.
And will the clerk please read?
Yes. Slowly, sorry. Ordinance 2024-24 to authorize the issuance of the City of Bloomington, Indiana General Obligation Bonds, Series 2024, for the purpose of providing funds to pay for certain capital projects of the city and expenses incurred in connection with the issuance of the bonds. The synopsis is as follows. Well, please forgive me for the slight delay. This ordinance approves the issuance of general obligation bonds of the City of Bloomington, Indiana, under Indiana Code 364619 in an aggregate principal amount not to exceed $4,300,000 in order to finance certain capital projects throughout the city.
All right, thank you. And that ordinance will go to a second reading on November 20th. Now we move on to our second readings and resolutions for this evening.
I would like to move Resolution 2024-22 be introduced and read by the clerk by title and synopsis only.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. Will the clerk please call the roll on the motion?
Yes, Councilmember Rosenbarger,
Yes.
Daley,
Yes.
Flaherty,
Yes.
Ruff,
Yes.
Piedmont Smith,
Yes.
Strasburg,
Yes.
Asari.
Yes.
Thank you. So will the clerk please, when you are ready, go ahead and read by title and synopsis.
Resolution 2024-22 to approve an update to the City of Bloomington's Americans with Disabilities Act Transition Plan. The synopsis is as follows. This resolution approves an updated Americans with Disabilities Act, ADA, transition plan for 2024 that shall act as an advisory document for the City of Bloomington.
I move Resolution 2024-22 be adopted.
Second.
All right. And I believe we have Michael Shermas to present this item for us. Come on up.
Good evening, council members. My name is Michael Shermas. I'm the Human Rights Director, ADA Coordinator, and Staff Liaison for the Council for Community Accessibility. And city governments of anything above 50 people, 50 employees are required to file an ADA transition plan stating how we are trying to become more compliant with the ADA, American with Disabilities Act. And we did one 2 years ago after a 7-year gap. And so this is, we agreed at that time that we would try to be consistent and do it every 2 years, and I'm right on target. It's been 2 years since we did the last one. This one is more pro forma. The last one was a big deal because we hadn't done it in 7 years. This year we reorganized a bit of the data to make it a little bit easier, but it's not that much different than the last one. The next one, 2 years from now, will be much more significant. And I only tell you that to say, get ready. It's going to include the digital accessibility work groups, digital accessibility strategic plan that the city's undertaking right now. And because it's part of how we're becoming more compliant in the digital world, as well as physical accessibility, it will be a big part of the next transition plan in a couple of years. But nonetheless, I and numerous other people worked very hard to get this all finished up and ready for your review. And I think it's, once again, a good document, but I await any of your questions at this point.
Thank you, Mr. Shermas. I think you should be wearing at least 3 hats tonight, since you,
Sometimes it feels like that.
you indicated you play many important roles with the city. Thank you. Are there questions for Mr. Shermis about the ADA transition plan? I do have one question. On page 11 of the plan, it talks about ADA standards and guidelines, and it says, the city also works at other ways to make its programs, meetings, et cetera, more inclusive. The addition of mobility options, like an accessible golf cart, minibus, and all-terrain wheelchair, tactile maps are but a couple of examples. Can you tell us more about these? So does that mean the city now has an accessible golf cart, a minibus, an all-terrain wheelchair?
Yes, they are. I think the all-terrain wheelchair is still coming in. Well, no, I think it's here. I have to look into that one. The other two we do have, yes. And the tactile map is, we just finished the review of the vendor that's going to supply that, and it should be sometime in the early spring, I think, that it's going to be here. So these are things that are on their way, but the Council for Community Accessibility members and myself were consulted along the way. Usually it's me as a staff member who bring them into it and talk to them about what their thoughts are and stuff like that. But yes, most of that stuff is here now.
And the tactile map, is that a map of the whole city or of a park?
It's a map of Switchyard Park. There is a hope that someday that it would be 30 more of them, one for every park, so that there would be one in every park. But I can just say it's really cool. It's, I don't know, 4 foot by 2 foot or something like that, and it's going to be amazing. I brought it to somebody who is an expert Braille reader and had her review it and look it over, and she was like, this is the vendor you should choose. So we took that into account as we were selecting which vendor, and we just did that about 2 days ago. So, yeah.
Exciting.
Yeah.
So is this going to be mounted outside?
Outside, it will be weather resistant and hopefully abuse resistant. It will be in Switchyard Park, sort of across from the splash pad area. So it's pretty. It will be pretty cool. So.
Great, thank you.
Yeah.
Councilmember Stossberg?
I do have a question. I was just trying to figure out how to phrase it. I'm looking at page 23, I think, of the study. Yeah, it has that image of the planned crosswalk across Kinzer by the Kroger there. And it's maybe nice that our city engineer is also sitting over there tonight, but I was wondering about the timeline of that installation, whether it was gonna have a hawk signal push button for crossings, just because I know that area gets incredibly busy with school-related traffic during certain times of day. And so I just am kind of looking at that, wondering about when it's gonna be installed and also how it's going to adapt to those situations where there's a ton of traffic trying to get out there related to school traffic.
I'm actually going to turn to my colleague, Andrew Seaboard, the engineering department director, and see if he might have a more specific answer to that question, because that's probably too specific for me to be able to do.
Yeah, I'm thoroughly taking advantage of the fact that Mr. Seaboard is here tonight for another issue.
Good evening, Andrew Seaboard, city engineer. I wish I had the date on the top of my head to share with you, but I don't. I'm happy to follow up on it. It is a project that's moving forward, and I'll follow up with you on the timeline for it.
Okay. Do you expect it to be in 2024 or 2025 then?
It is, I think, one of our federally funded crosswalk improvement projects. I just have to figure out what the slate is. There were some questions in the past about right-of-way acquisition, and that's why it has not yet happened. So I can't confidently tell you what that schedule is right now.
Okay, thanks.
Sorry.
That's all right, thanks.
Are there any other questions on this resolution? Councilmember Flaherty?
Thank you. Thank you so much for the presentation and all the work that went into this. I appreciate reading it, and the list of facilities pages 36 to, well, yeah, 36 to 40 or something like that. There's about 10 overall parks facilities that are listed as, or categorized as not accessible. And some of those, it's obvious to me why that might be the case, like Wapahani Mountain Bike Park, for instance. Some of the others, it wasn't necessarily as obvious. And I maybe have two questions related to that. One is, we heard from Tim Street, the Parks Director, during the budget hearings this year that we're going to add paved trails, for instance, south of Country Club, down to connect to the Clear Creek Trail to make that accessible. I think it's going to be parallel and not replace, at least in some instances. But so that's a facility that's currently not accessible and will be becoming accessible. It strikes me that some of the others listed here may not really be, like, what does it mean to make Wapahani Mountain Bike Park accessible, for instance, is that. And so could you speak at all to that list of non-accessible parks facilities? And is it all kind of a context-sensitive question about what could be done here, given the nature of the activity or the facility? Or like, can you just tell me more about that?
I wish Tim was here as well to talk about that, obviously. I've been having discussions with him because the Council for Community Accessibility does accessibility surveys on facilities, as in buildings, and we have trained them over the years to be able to do those surveys. Just like medical buildings, parks are also another challenges to them because there can be much more extensive, and we're not really trained to be able to do that. But it's clear that the Parks Department does not have a very full inventory of what is accessible and not accessible. And one of the purchases that came from the ARPA funding this past year has been a software platform called BlueDag that does accessibility surveys, and it's an amazing piece of software that includes all of the latest building codes for every state and all of the ADA and all of ProWag and all sorts of other things as well. It could be used to do parks as well. And so in the new year, he and I are going to sit down and try to figure out whether that's possible for them to use it or whether to get consultants maybe to use it and try it. We only allowed so many surveys a year, so in the next part of the year, maybe he sees he's want to use it, and then we re-up that purchase for another year or however much further to use it for that express purpose, because frankly, they don't have a full inventory of what is fully accessible and not, so they're going to be working on that. I hope that answers a little bit of the question.
That is helpful, thank you.
Yeah.
Any other questions for Mr. Shermis? Okay, seeing none, we will go to the public. Is there any member of the public who would like to make a comment about resolution, what is it? 2024-22, sorry. If there's anybody in the public who would like to make a comment, please come forward. And if you are joining the meeting via Zoom, please use the raise hand function to indicate you would like to make a comment. I don't see anybody here in council chambers. Is there anybody on Zoom? Thank you. All right, we will come back to the council for comments, discussion before the vote. And I just wanted to put out there that I did have an email exchange with Adam Wason, because I was asking about the in-depth sidewalk assessment that we had talked about earlier this year that Public Works was going to do to follow up on the more general assessment that didn't seem quite satisfactory that was done last year. And he replied that the update on the sidewalk inspection inventory is that we are finalizing the scope and cost in that contract with an approval request heading to the Board of Public Works at their December 4th meeting. The inspection data will then be completed and available in the first quarter of 2025. So just wanted to share that with my colleagues. Any comments from council members? Councilmember Flaherty.
Thank you. Just to thank you again and note of appreciation for the update, and noting also that the comprehensive plan updates we adopted earlier this year, one of the policies set out in those that goal and new set of priorities around accessibility, which former Councilmember Boland helped initiate via resolution, is to make sure that we're updating this on a 2-year cycle, like Mr. Shermis noted. And so those updates already in action here tonight. So thank you very much for that, and look forward to voting in favor.
Any other comments? I would just say I also want to thank the Council on Community Accessibility, who are all volunteers who do great work in the service of our community. And of course, my thanks to Mr. Shermis as well. And I think we can call the roll on Resolution 2024-22.
Councilmember Daley?
Yes.
Flaherty?
Yes.
Ruff?
Yes.
Piedmont Smith?
Yes.
Strasburg?
Yes.
Asari?
Yes.
Rosenbarger?
Yes.
Thank you.
And that resolution is adopted by a vote of 7-0.
I would like to move resolution 2024-21 be introduced and read by the clerk by title and synopsis only.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. Will the clerk please call the roll on the motion to introduce Resolution 2024-21?
Councilmember Flaherty?
Yes.
Ruff?
Yes.
Piedmont Smith?
Yes.
Strasburg?
Yes.
Asari?
Yes.
Rosenbarger?
Yes.
Daley?
Yes.
Thank you.
That motion passes 7-0. Will the clerk please read the resolution by title and synopsis?
Resolution 2024-21, resolution of the Common Council of the City of Bloomington rejecting the establishment of a merit system for the Bloomington Police Department. The synopsis is as follows. This resolution rejects the establishment of a merit system for the Bloomington Police Department in accordance with the provisions of Indiana Code Title 36(8) 3.5-5.5.
I move resolution 2024-21 be adopted.
Second.
All right. And who do we have to speak to this evening? I see Attorney Christopher Wheeler on Zoom.
Yes, good evening. Chris Wheeler with City Legal, and I'm here to discuss the resolution before you this evening, which is 2024-21. And the reason why this resolution is being brought to council is because in 2023, state legislature passed legislation to require all municipalities who have qualifying responder departments such as fire and police to adopt a merit system unless they take action to reject that merit system. Chief Dekoff is here tonight with me. He's in person. I apologize for not being able to be there in person, but he is here also to speak on behalf of the police department. But the police department took a straw poll and determined that they would like, in fact, to reject the merit system. But they cannot reject the merit system until and unless the council first takes steps to pass a resolution that rejects the merit system. So there are dance steps in the statute that make it very clear. Council must first pass a resolution that will reject the merit system in order for it to get to the department so that the department can then conduct a vote. The way that happens is for the Board of Public Safety to issue notice to all department members who qualify to vote. All active, full-time, paid members of the department get notified that there will be a meeting that is conducted for the sole and only purpose of voting on accepting or rejecting the merit system based upon the resolution that's been passed by council. So we are here tonight expressing the wishes of the department that this body pass the resolution before it to reject the merit system so that statutorily we can conduct the necessary meeting to have the necessary vote in order to have the department reject the merit system. That's a very nutshell synopsis of what we're trying to accomplish, and I'm very happy to answer questions. As I said, Chief Dekoff is also here to answer questions. Also with us this evening is Assistant City Attorney Enadina Casamanian, who is the attorney for the police department.
Thank you. Chief Dekoff, did you want to say anything by way of presentation?
Good evening, Council. Mike Dekoff, Police Chief for the City of Bloomington. When this came about, we started talking about it internally at the department, and we did a straw vote of all of the officers, and the vote was 68 to 14 with 8 no responses to keep the Board of Safety. The Board of Safety has been something that we have operated under ever since I can remember. It is something where there are 5 members appointed by the mayor that basically oversees police and fire. I think a little bit of a misnomer is if the merit board goes into effect, the Board of Safety does not go away. They have certain statutory responsibilities that they will still have to act on that a merit board cannot do. So for simplicity's sake and for the sake of it's, everybody was basically looking at it as the system's not broke, so why do we need to fix it? The officers would prefer to have the Board of Safety still be in place and not act to move to a merit board system.
Thank you. All right, are there any questions from council members for either Mr. Wheeler or Chief Dekoff? Councilmember Asare.
Thank you both so much, and thank you, Madam President, for the recognition. Just for clarification's sake, and I think you answered this already in the memo, but just to clarify, should in the future either the city or the police department want to join the merit board system, is that a thing that can happen, or is this a decision once and for all forever?
If I may, Madam President, you are 100% accurate in that. This is nothing that gets etched in stone and is forever. When a decision like this is made, either to accept or reject the merit system, that department has the opportunity to come back and change its mind, essentially, and go through statutory steps to do the exact opposite. Right now, the police department is short-staffed, so they would like very much to try and keep as many of their officers available to do those things that are required in order to properly enforce the law, and to do those things that the department needs to do to successfully enforce the law for the city of Bloomington. 2 members of the police department would need by necessity to be appointed to the board, the merit system board, which would then detract or pull away from doing the things that need to currently be done to enforce the law, to get all of the things done that they need to do. And that's not a necessary thing to do right now, because as Chief Dekoff said, the Board of Public Safety already does those things very successfully for the department. So that's not to say, however, that once the department becomes fully staffed and maybe they get to thinking about it, they could decide that they would like, in fact, to become a part of the merit system, in which case we would come back and take all the necessary steps to statutorily create the merit system for the department.
Thank you so much.
Are there other questions on this item? Councilmember Stossberg.
I have a really similar question, but it's kind of the opposite. Like, if we reject this now and nobody changed their minds in the future or anything like that, and everybody's all happy with it being rejected, does it have to come back at some point for reconsideration in terms of state statute, or it's just fine?
No, there is no opportunity, there is no requirement or like a time for review, if that's what you're suggesting. If the department determines that it doesn't want the merit system, and never decides that it wants the merit system, then we would never come back to council seeking to establish the merit system.
Other questions on this item? I will ask one. What is the benefit of a merit system? Mr. Wheeler, as far as the state legislature taking action on this, what was their reasoning for making this decision? Can you
I
speak to
didn't
that?
do any digging into the legislative history to see what was argued on the legislative floors as to why they decided to try and create a situation where municipalities would have to adopt the merit system if they did nothing. And that's what happens. If we do nothing by December 31st, we just automatically have not one, but two merit systems in place. One for the fire department, one for the police department. So I'm not really sure why the state legislature decided to do what it did. There may have been some lobbying that occurred to try and create a situation where merit systems would more likely be established. The one benefit that I could think of, and I guess I didn't brainstorm a whole lot, but the one benefit that I was able to come up with is that for departments who wish to have the merit system, because what the merit system does is allow for a merit board to do all of the hiring, the firing, the discipline of the members, and two members of the department become appointed to that board. So it gives the department a voice in the hiring, firing, promotion, and discipline of its own members. So I can see that as a benefit to the department itself. Otherwise, I have a hard time figuring out just exactly what the benefit is, not only to the city, but to the department itself.
And are we going to be hearing from, I hope Mr. Wheeler's still there. I don't see him anymore, but are we still going to be hearing from the Bloomington Fire Department in regard to their view of the merit board, or are they just going to accept it?
I don't believe any members of the fire department will be coming before the council, because if you want the merit system, it's a very easy process. You do nothing. The fire department has indicated that, in fact, they would like to have the merit system. They're fully staffed. They can afford to have members be on a board, a merit board, and they would like to try it out. That's not to say that they ultimately will decide they don't like it and might come back later and seek to reject the merit system at a later date. But for now, the fire department wishes to try it out. And so we don't have to do anything. On January 1st, that merit system will start to exist. We will have to take steps to then get the board fully staffed, fully appointed, have bylaws created, and set up rules and regulations for how all of these processes will take place with regards to hiring and firing. So there'll be a lot of work to be done come the first of the year with regards to the fire department. And that work has actually already begun for us to get everything put in place.
Thank you for that information. That's helpful. Are there any other questions from council members? All right, seeing none, we'll go to the public. Is there any member of the public who would like to comment on Resolution 2024-21, rejection of a merit system for the Bloomington Police Department? You will have up to 3 minutes, and we do ask you to sign in and state your full name. And if you're joining us on Zoom, you can use the raise hand function, which should be in the reactions button at the bottom of your screen. All right, we'll start here in Chambers. Go ahead.
Hello, my name is Joe Davis, and I have some concerns that I would like to express about the advocacy not for the BPD not to establish the merit board system. Number one, I would like to say that anything that Christopher Wheeler, Assistant City Attorney Christopher Wheeler, is laying his hands on, you know that there's the potential for bad faith in his work. Because,
Madam President.
You should not be addressing individuals and their motivations and their qualifications.
okay, all right. I just have had that experience myself. And as you can see, Christopher Wheeler did not do a deep dive into what the benefits would be, but I'm sure he can tell you a dozen reasons why city legal would not want BPD to have greater authority over their hiring, their firing, their disciplining of their own people. One could think about the Public Safety Board and the Merit Board as two insurance programs. Isn't it better to be doubly insured than just have one insurer? Sure, they might be understaffed, but as you just heard, the fire department wants to have a merit board system. Is the advice that's being received by Bloomington Police Department really good advice in their best interest? Do we know that? Or are they just being told a story that is going to hobble them in the future? I believe that the best approach would be to have both systems. BPD is smart, they're resourceful, they know how to handle many tasks at the same time. This is the hiring, the firing, the disciplining of their own. Why would they wish to give up a seat at the table to influence these decisions? It doesn't make any sense whatsoever. I believe the best approach is to have both of these systems enacted, and then that way, at a future point, changes can be made. Thank you very much.
All right. Is there anybody else in council chambers who would like to make a comment? Is there anybody on Zoom who would like to make a comment? Thank you. All right, we'll come back to council members for final discussion or comment prior to a vote. Is there any council member who would like to comment? Councilmember Stossberg.
I'll comment and use some words that I just heard, which was that BPD is smart and resourceful, and I think that if they wanted a merit system, then they would be telling us right now that that's what they wanted, and right now they're telling us that that's not what they want, and so I think that we need to respect what they're telling us. Thank you.
Any other comments from council members? All right. Well, then I will ask Clerk Bolden to please call the roll on Resolution 2024-21.
Councilmember Ruff? Yes. Piedmont Smith?
Yes.
Stossberg?
Yes.
Asari?
Yes.
Rosenbarger?
Yes.
Daly?
Yes.
Flaherty?
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you. So that resolution passes with a vote of 7-0. And now we're ready for the next item of legislation.
I would like to move ordinance 2024-23 be introduced and read by the clerk by title and synopsis only.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded that ordinance 2024-23 be read by title and synopsis. Clerk Bolden, will you please call the roll on the motion?
Piedmont Smith?
Yes.
Stossberg?
Yes.
Asari?
Yes.
Rosenbarger?
Yes.
Daly?
Yes.
Flaherty?
Yes.
Ruff?
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you. Will the clerk please read?
Ordinance 2024-23 to amend Title 15 of the Bloomington Municipal Code entitled Vehicles and Traffic regarding amending Section 15.12.010 stop intersections to 1, remove stop intersection on 7th Street from Schedule A and add 1 multi-stop intersection on 7th Street to Schedule B. The synopsis is as follows. This ordinance is sponsored by Council Members Flaherty, Rosenbarger, and Strasburg and amends Title 15, Vehicles and Traffic, of the Bloomington Municipal Code. The ordinance makes the following change. Replaces 1 stop intersection with a multi-stop intersection along 7th Street at Dunn Street.
I move ordinance 2024-23 be adopted.
Second.
All right, so we will go to the sponsors. There are 3 sponsors of this legislation. Who would like to present?
Councilmember Flaherty is starting.
Sure, thank
Okay.
you. And do our staff have the presentation slides to pull up? Thank you very, very much. Next slide, please. So this ordinance is about taking action now where we do have strong alignment or agreement among the council and city staff and city boards and commissions, or specifically commissions, and then also initiating a forward-looking process to try to find alignment and agreement in areas where we may not currently have alignment and agreement among city council, administration, and commissions. So specifically, first, this ordinance would codify a multi-stop intersection or all-way stop at Dunn Street and 7th Street, making permanent the status of that is currently under 180-day order from the city engineer. And then, again, we would, through the whereas clauses, there's some direction and previous agreement with city staff that they would be willing to work with folks from the council and likely representatives from the advisory commissions regarding the 7th Street corridor as a whole and looking at both design and traffic control choices to align with city goals that, again, try to find something like consensus or better alignment than we've been able to achieve to date. Next slide. Just briefly, with Dunn Street and 7th Street intersection, based on data following the installation of the 7-line infrastructure and other related transit and pedestrian improvements to the 7th Street corridor between the B line and Woodlawn Avenue. We just have data that present the clearest case for an all-way stop at this intersection. And again, there's been a series of 180-day orders in place since Q2 of 2023 that need to be made permanent. I've mentioned already widespread agreement among the council, advisory commissions, both the Traffic Commission and Bicycle and Pedestrian Safety Commission on this point. Next slide, please. With respect to the second goal I shared, which is to try to find alignment where we haven't had it yet, with respect to just the rest of the 7th Street corridor, I guess. I want to really make sure we're grounding the conversation and any decisions about design and about traffic controls in our adopted city goals, as reflected either in the comprehensive plan, for instance, or other legislation. So specifically, these 3 goals are to improve safety on our streets, to increase sustainability of our transportation system, and to improve accessibility. I think we all recall earlier this year, we passed a resolution, 2024-07, to reduce traffic deaths and serious injuries on the city's roadways. That's our focus in terms of street safety. And of course, we have the Safe Streets for All action plan forthcoming. You can see with respect to sustainability, the primary way in which we plan to achieve those goals are through mode shift, through getting more people to take the bus, to walk for more trips, to ride their bicycle for more trips. And of course, we have a whole series of policies and even a whole plan aimed at helping us do that. And then finally, with accessibility, as I mentioned earlier this evening when we heard the update to the ADA transition plan, these are recently adopted section of our comprehensive plan about developing equitable access, and that includes facilities like bus stops, for instance. So again, I think the question we need to be asking as a council, as a city, is how to optimize the design and traffic controls along the 7th Street corridor across these 3 goals. Next slide, please. So looking at safety, sustainability, and accessibility improvements to date, just First, noting that this is, in fact, an award-winning project and a success. Have made meaningful improvements across all of these goals. So pedestrian improvements included raised crosswalks, which are safer on the east-west direction of travel, south side of 7th Street. Also, shorter crossing distances on the north and south sides of 7th Street for east-west travel by way of bump outs being constructed. And then also shorter cross distances north-south than we used to have, thanks to what is a functional pedestrian island now made by the curb-protected infrastructure for the protected bicycle lane. With respect to bicyclist improvements, this was really the first protected bicycle lane in the city of Bloomington, of any appreciable length anyway. It's what you call all ages and abilities infrastructure. I've heard from constituents, for instance, who ride bikes with their young children and ride 7th Street across town. This has been transformational for folks who rely on their bicycle for commuting and as a mode of transportation, and just getting more folks to ride generally who wouldn't be able to otherwise. There's also dedicated bicycle signals at Walnut and College and greater overall efficiency and connectivity for bicycles, connecting to the B-line, connecting to campus with an efficient route that mirrors the convenience of the B-line in many respects. And we have the numbers that show this has really led to a significant increase in use of this mode. Finally, with transit, the other mode that our plans say we should prioritize, we have 3 improved ADA-compliant bus stops at Woodlawn, Dunn, and Washington, where previously those bus stops were not really compliant. There was a curb drop-off, and it was difficult for buses to pull over adequately due to parked cars, and then also difficult for them to move back out into moving traffic if they had pulled over. So all of those changes have not only increased accessibility, but also improved efficiency of the transit route along 7th Street. With regard to safety improvements and outcomes, we do have reduced bicycle, scooter, and pedestrian-involved crashes, who are some of the most vulnerable road users. That's compared to pre-project, even with significantly increased use of this corridor. So lower crash rates on a per-trip basis. I'll note that reduction isn't a major reduction. Those numbers are similar right now, but I again will note that that's with the significantly increased use. Finally, we had additional data shared by Mr. Seabour, our city engineer, showing incapacitating injuries, which are of a particular focus for our Vision Zero goal and the resolution we passed earlier this year, and those have been reduced considerably in the post-project period compared to the pre-project period. With that, I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Councilmember Stossberg, to talk about some particular possibilities that could be considered, and I don't think have at least had council member or commission involvement in consideration to date.
Great, thank you very much for that overview so far. So one of the things that I wanted to talk about was the specific whereas clause, because one of the things I want to make sure to acknowledge is that people are concerned about this corridor and that we don't just want to stop talking about it, that we don't just want to say codify Dunn and 7th where everybody agrees and then we're going to stop worrying about it. We want to continue worrying about it. We want to continue thinking about how it can maintain its effectiveness for priority transit and cycling, and also improve in other ways for safety and comfort. So next slide, please. So in thinking about the crashes and the data that's been shown so far in terms of increasing safety at it, I felt like there were 2 main things that I have been told would help. One is slowing traffic on 7th Street, and one is increasing awareness of the cross traffic. So in terms of speed data, Director Seabour reported that the majority of vehicles exceed the posted speed limit of 25 miles an hour, and that 85th percentile speeds are 30 miles an hour. In that same report, he indicated that speeds only decreased about 2 miles an hour around Dunn Street after the always stop sign was installed. So I share that by way, like, putting in stop signs aren't necessarily going to solve this as a problem, because they're not actually maybe reducing speeds as much as they could, and that part of the problem is that cars on 7th Street are feeling comfortable enough to speed. And so please nobody comments on my mediocre photography, by the way, on these, because I just wanted to take the picture and keep on going with my day. So this is looking up 7th Street right now. I was standing actually right at one of the transit stops. So that's kind of the way it looks right now. It is a very straight road. There's not much there. So Next slide, please. My first considerations have to do with considering how we could slow down traffic. And I also want to emphasize that this is the start of a conversation. These are things that I thought that we could talk about in those meetings in terms of having communication about what things might make a difference. So a couple things that I've noticed. First of all, there are no pedestrian crossing signs along the 7th Street corridor from Woodlawn until that one that's pictured right there at Madison. Not one sign that reminds vehicular drivers, hey, there might be people crossing the street here, and you need to pay attention to them. And the other thing that I have noticed is the crosswalk stripes are not particularly apparent. They're not, I just don't see them as much. And I ride this corridor all the time as a cyclist. I just don't see them very much. And I went out and measured them. They're actually 6 feet long. Like the length there is 6 feet. Next slide, please. And I want to compare that to a couple other streets we have. One on the left there is Winslow Street, just west of Acadia Court. And I just drove it this weekend, and I was like, wow, look at all of those pedestrian signs going all the way down that entire street. And of course, it's a different street. It's got a little curve to it. It's much nicer, honestly, than the last time I drove down it in terms of pedestrian access. But those 3 arrows are, it's hard to see in the distance, once again, my photography, but there are at least those 3 pedestrian crossing signs there, and I think that that's apparent. And then the photo on the right, 7th and Union, is on the east side of campus, and I noticed recently we had very large pedestrian crossing signs. They're 36 inches square, and they're really huge, and I actually measured those crosswalk stripes, and they're 10 feet long, and that's significantly longer than the 6-foot ones. And so I'm thinking to myself, if we put some signage up there, if we changed how that landscape looked, if you think back to that first photo I showed, changing how it looks, popping out some yellow signs that say, hey, remember pedestrians exist, making those crosswalks bigger, would that make a difference to slow down traffic? And that's a question. I don't have an answer to it, but that's the kind of information that I'm thinking about. Next slide, please. And then similarly, we could have along 7th Street cross-street warning signs reminding drivers on 7th Street that these cross streets exist, that they might not have a stop sign, but there are cars coming from either directions potentially. And that might make a difference. We have that electronic speed monitoring sign. That's the one over on Atwater that we put in. Is that making a difference? I don't know. That's a question for engineering. I don't know the answer to it right now. But it's these sorts of things that I'm thinking about. And the argument can be made and has been made that, well, signs only make a temporary difference. But if we look at the safety data, at the crash data, most of these crashes are happening during times of year that we have a lot of population transition, a lot of students moving in or out. So we may have more drivers on our streets that are unaware of how they work, and maybe signs would make a lasting difference in this case. We don't know, and we haven't tried. And so that's part of this whereas clause, is that maybe we just need to try something. Next slide, please. And then the other consideration I said is the cross-street traffic, is people crossing 7th Street being made aware of the fact that they have a stop sign and 7th Street doesn't stop, and they're not yielding to those drivers on 7th Street. And these were kind of interesting because, honestly, I mean, I can barely even read those signs from here that says cross traffic, do not stop. Those signs are 12 inches high, and they're the same width as the stop sign. And actually, I noticed the one on Grant right now is completely bent, and you can't actually read that. And I don't have a photo of it because I just noticed it earlier. But next slide, please. I think that there are lots of alternatives for cross traffic does not stop signs. And one of them, the one on the right, is actually at 6th and Washington. It's significantly larger than the ones that are crossing the B line. It's 18 inches high, and it's wider than the stop sign, and it makes it look bigger. And then there's just other potential models for signs. I kind of like the one with the arrow just because that breaks up the writing a little bit more. It might make it easier to see, easier for those cars that are crossing to recognize that there's something different going on. There's LED light ups, there's that big caution, there's different sizes and orientations. And I think that those are things that should at least be talked about and explored before we just go back to a default of what was there before. And now I think we're going back to Councilmember Flaherty.
And so we have had some discussion of this over time, and what I opened with was really trying to root our considerations along the 7th Street corridor in our city goals. We should always be coming back to what are the goals we're trying to accomplish, and again, that's safety, sustainability, and accessibility. And with much respect to Mr. Seabour and his expertise, we have had differences of opinion about approach at times, and I just wanted to highlight some of those that I think sometimes we start talking about potential interventions or things with this corridor kind of too far down the path and not rooting ourselves in the frame that I began with. And so one is that I worry that defaulting to always stops at every intersection fails to appropriately balance the sustainability, accessibility, and safety goals. That it's kind of like a trade-off, but one potentially improvement in one to the detriment of the other, when there might be solutions that are actually not a zero-sum, that might be able to work to the benefit of all goals. I think we have tended to focus on an overly narrow question, which is whether or not an always stop or multi-stop intersection will reduce crashes. The answer to that question is probably yes, but that's true at almost every intersection in the city. You could add an always stop at 8th and Walnut, 6th and Rogers, 4th and Rogers. You know, take your pick. Anywhere we have crashes, if you added an always stop, you would probably reduce crashes. That's almost a truism. And so I don't think it's a meaningful enough question to, again, guide us to how to optimize a complex set of considerations across three goals. Another is that we've tended to focus on crash numbers rather than safety. These are not, in fact, the same thing. Our Vision Zero goals really does focus on serious injuries and deaths, and that's what we're seeking to eliminate. I know that may seem counterintuitive. A sort of well-known or prominent example of this in transportation circles is that roundabouts actually tend to, or can tend to, increase the crash rate at intersections. The state of Michigan did a meta-analysis of all of the roundabouts over a period of time. They had considerably higher crash volumes and considerably lower injury rates, because the types of crashes that occurred at always stop intersections or at signalized intersections with traffic lights were much more severe than those experienced at roundabouts, even though there were more crashes with the roundabouts. That's not to say there's a direct translation here, but just to illustrate that even if counterintuitive, crashes and safety are in fact different things, and we should make sure that we're keeping the focus on safety, not on crash numbers. Not accounting for a more significant potentially longer behavioral adjustment period for a type of infrastructure that frankly many folks have probably never encountered before. This is the first curb-protected bike lane in the city of Bloomington. It's probably one of the first in the state of Indiana. As Councilmember Stossberg noted, we have folks who are new here all the time, and I know Mr. Seabour has previously shared that when it comes to a change in traffic patterns, his expectation and experience over his career has been that people do usually adjust pretty quickly, like within a month or two. I think the two things challenging that assumption here are one, the very difference of the infrastructure and the different nature of the infrastructure, and then two is the fact that we have population turnover frequently with students in particular on an annual basis. And to sort of demonstrate that this hasn't been enough on a 1 or 2 month basis, we actually still to this day have flexible delineator posts blocking cars from entering the protected bike lane. So despite the fact that this infrastructure has been there several years now, if we didn't have those delineator posts in place, people would still be driving into the bike lane. Quite clearly, there is at least some set of the population for whom it will take a much longer period of time to understand what this infrastructure is and how to interact with it. Another note is that this has come through twice before in some form through the Traffic Commission and Bicycle Pedestrian Safety Commission, and for the most part, with the exception of I think one intersection, perhaps Morton, that these two commissions have largely not voted in favor of a plan to put always stop intersections along the whole corridor. For some of the same reasons that we've shared here. So we know that there are folks on those commissions who would like to engage in this forward-looking conversation and collaboration as well. Finally, I kind of noted this previously, but we have devoted a lot of time and attention to this corridor. And I think that's kind of a product of it being new and different. And yes, there have been some complaints from folks who don't like the infrastructure, which of course is inevitable. We experienced the same thing with traffic calming. I think it's led to a level of scrutiny and focus, though, on this particular corridor and each of these intersections that is not a level of scrutiny that we are bringing to other intersections. And so some of the crash data that's been shared, for instance, about 6 or more crashes in a 3-year period as possible guidance to have an intervention like an all-way stop. There are other places in the city for which that is true that we are not acting on. And so anytime something like that is the case, I immediately start to have some concerns about not approaching things, if we're not approaching things consistently or equitably in terms of how we're applying our attention and the types of solutions we're looking at. Next slide, please. So again, back to the beginning, the purpose of this ordinance is to codify the thing we all agree on, I think, and to try to find room for collaborative and generative conversations to optimize across these 3 goals that we've adopted as a city, among the council, among city staff, and among the relevant advisory commissions, so that we can co-produce solutions that ideally better meet all of our goals and have broader buy-in among all parties. So that is our hope, though again, recognize folks have different views and opinions on this, and very much appreciate Mr. Seabor's work on this and also his willingness to join us this evening to discuss. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there any, would Councilmember Rosenbarger like to add anything as the third sponsor?
Oh, thank you. No, I'm okay.
Okay. All right. Shall we go to questions then? Do council members have any questions either for the co-sponsors or for the city staff in the form of city engineer Andrew Seabor?
Yeah, I have some questions.
Councilmember Ruff?
My questions are mostly for Mr. Seabor. I might have some questions for the sponsors in a minute after maybe other council members have an opportunity to ask. But, I ride this corridor all the time. Every time I come to City Hall, I basically come this way. And I always came that way before. In the 20 years I served on council from 2000 to 2020, but I would sometimes vary up my route just because sometimes I would go a different route east-west. So the memo from the sponsors and the language actually of the ordinance itself suggests that it's clear and undebatable that this has been, there's been a dramatic increase in cycling. What I can't tease out, and I may have this question for the sponsors later, but is whether we have the data to say that's a net change or whether that's just more bicycle traffic on the 7th Street corridor. Or can we say, no, there has been a net overall increase, significantly, dramatically more bicycle trips east-west through this area, this region of Bloomington, now compared to before? Can we say that? Do we have that evidence? Do we have that data?
Good evening, Andrew Seabor, city engineer. So to repeat, the question's basically, are we seeing an overall net increase in east-west cycling in this vicinity of the city? Is that?
No. I'm sorry. My question specifically is the references to an increase in cycling on 7th Street, on the 7 line. Is that, do we have the evidence, do we have data to show that that is an increase overall and not just a diversion of trips that would have occurred and were previously occurring on 8th Street or on other streets going east to west that are now diverted to the 7 line? Or can we say that, oh no, there's been a dramatic increase overall. It's not just, we know it's not just a diversion of trips onto 7th Street.
Yeah, I guess a couple thoughts. First, there definitely has been a significant increase in cycling activity on the 7th Street corridor since the improvements have been made there. I don't know off of the top of my head if we have data that can allow me to definitively state we are seeing an increase in cycling activity. I would hope that we are, as we've built more infrastructure and are continuing to build out the network. There is probably some diversion that is happening as a result of creating a high comfort facility. How much of that increase we're seeing on 7th Street is a diversion versus just new people choosing to use that mode, I can't answer that question.
Okay, well, at this point, if any other council members have a question, please move on, but then I'll let come back.
Sure, Councilmember Stossberg, as a co-sponsor, would like to address the question.
I just want to say that I'm not sure that it matters to me whether it's diversion or whether it's new riders. I mean, in terms of climate goals, it does matter because we want people to have mode shift, right? But in terms of thinking about it as a safer place for cyclists to be, I think that if it's diverting from other streets, then that still is making it really, really successful because that is honestly consolidating traffic. I mean, that's kind of what we do with other streets with cars, right? Like 3rd Street is a really large street. We want our cars to tend to go on 3rd Street instead of going through the neighborhoods. And so then we put in infrastructure that facilitates, you know, faster movement in some places and slower movement in the others. And so this is an area where in my opinion, we kind of said to ourselves, okay, we want to make this really, really high comfort and really, really efficient and really, really good for cyclists. And so this is the street that they're going to use as opposed to using 10th or 8th or any of the other streets. So I think that's an interesting question. But in terms of the goal of the 7 line, I think that either diversion or new use would cover both of those things.
Madam President, can I also just briefly add to that, which
Yes, Councilmember Flaherty.
Thank you. I agree that if it's making cycling safer, even if it was the aggregate same number in a given catchment, that would still be a really positive step forward. But I will note that, like, even if we don't have the pre and post counts for every east-west street within a half mile, say, to like build a data set that would definitively prove that, other cities have and do that type of data collection, and these are, you know, well-trialed, research-based, proven methods for inducing demand, that is, getting new riders. So even if we haven't gone through that data collection exercise in a city our scale, I think we do have general high confidence that this is the type of infrastructure that does, in fact, lead to new users.
All right, and I saw a question from Councilmember Daley.
Thank you. So this question is probably more for Mr. Seabour, but Councilmember Stossberg, I don't know if you might have this information since you were talking about it, but you know, the idea of the traffic calming measures, I think, is very interesting to pursue rather than, you know, going right back to the stop signs and talking about those options. And I'm just curious, do we have any data that tells us how effective signs are, you know, pedestrian signs or cross traffic does not stop? Because just anecdotally, I know I tend to zone them out as a driver. You know, I'm so used to seeing them there that I don't know if it's subconsciously I know that they're there or if how effective they are. So are there numbers for that or no?
I'll take that before Mr. Seabour does a little bit, because part of it is that I said that. And he has said to me before that there is data that I mean, most drivers do that, right? Like they zone out signs, and part of it is, especially when you're on a familiar road, you just don't think about it anymore. And that's where I'm kind of, you know, and I asked Mr. Seabour for some speed data that he might have around, say, that 7th and Union one, because that one went in there pretty recently. And anecdotally, I mean, I go through that intersection all the time on a bicycle, and anecdotally, I can tell you, like, wow, it really feels like cars are going slower. Are cars actually going slower? And we don't have post-project speed data for that yet. So I don't know if cars are actually going slower. The Winslow stretch, I just noticed that over the weekend. So are cars actually going slower there? Did we even do do speed counts for before and after, I'm not sure. And then there's that one on Atwater that, like, I don't know if we have post data on that yet, but that was a discussion at some point. Like, if this goes in, is it actually going to make a lasting difference? So the question is it making a lasting difference? And so that's where, you know, with those things that I put up, it's like, this is the start of the conversation. These are the things that I'm thinking about. These are the things that have not been tried for a year and a half. We've been talking about stop signs and not talking about anything else. So I think that you're totally right. These may or may not actually make a difference, but is it worth trying before we just go back to something that's going to disrupt the efficiency of the infrastructure in the beginning? And I'll also say that I took a bus actually up there just earlier this week, and it was really noticeable when you're riding a bus. Oh, we just had to stop at Indiana. Oh, we just had to stop at Dunn. It was really nice to not have to stop at every single intersection going up that hill.
Mr. Seaborn.
Yeah, I think I agree with a lot of what's being said. I think if we add additional signs like the pedestrian warning signs, especially if we added it every single crosswalk, there's just then a lot of signs, and then people start to phase them out, or potentially can phase them out. We can look at different sized crosswalk markings. We can look at, there are the cross traffic does not stop signs. We could look at making them bigger, as we've talked about in the past, and continue to can talk about. Will they effectively reduce the crash pattern that we're seeing? Maybe not. Maybe. Ultimately, I was recommending these stop signs because I have confidence that those would work. We can have discussions about some of these things. They may have some benefit. We are actively, we try to do a lot of before-after studies of our projects. We are actively in the process of assessing the impact of those speed feedback signs that are on Hillside and Atwater, and some more information to come. But you know, if those are helpful and prove beneficial over time, that's another tool. So there's a lot of really good questions without clear answers, I guess, and certainly happy to engage in that discussion.
Thank you. Other first-round questions from council members? Is Councilmember Asari still with us, or did he leave? There he is. Okay. But no hand raised. So, Councilmember Ruff, if you'd like to go ahead with a second round of questions.
Okay, thank you. So, do we actually have data that shows a reduction in bicycle accidents as that we can say is a result of the 7 line? Because there have been some references tonight by my colleagues that are saying this is about safety of cyclists. So have we seen a drop in accidents and incidents involving cyclists going east-west in this area? Yeah, Mr. Seaborn, please.
Yeah, I think as the authors of this have noted, I think we're seeing, fortunately, there are not a lot of bicyclist crashes. There are not a lot of pedestrian crashes, so there aren't a lot of crashes to draw very strong, statistically significant conclusions from. But since, for example, since the all-way stop was installed at the 7th and Dunn intersection, what we are seeing when you look at the combined bicycle, pedestrian, scooter crashes, that the crash rates we're seeing over time right now is pretty similar to what it was before the project when there were all-way stops. And what we're also seeing is more users, especially of the bike and scooter mode. So as a crash rate per user, I think it is fair to say that there are less crashes. Overall, the crash rate per time is on par with what it was before the project.
So this is a regional sort of assumption you're making, that that there are more users and about the same number of crashes, so there are less crashes per unit. user.
For these specific users, yes, especially for the bicyclist mode.
So, again, can you tease that apart from, I mean, we're just looking at 7th Street, or are we looking at, like, if those rides had occurred in another area, would this data not reflect?
I guess my answer was focused just on the 7th Street corridor. That's what my answer was on.
Okay. I have more, but let's be able to second round.
Councilmember Strasburg, you wanted to respond as a co-sponsor?
Yeah, so one of the things I want to point Councilmember Ruff to right now is in our packet. It's actually on the last page of our packet. I don't know if it's possible to show it on the screen or not, but it's reported corridor injury crashes by mode. And that was something when I was writing my memo that I was looking at. And if you are able to look at that, it's a really kind of fun graph if staff is able to get that on a screen for everybody. But it is color-coded by the vehicle type, including bicycles and skateboarders and pedestrians, et cetera. And then there are letters for each of those crashes based on their severity. And so one of the things I looked at was the incapacitating injuries, which are labeled A, between 2016 and 2019, and there were 6 of them in that time period along that corridor. And then between 2022 and 2024, there was 1. And so that to me is showing that there's a reduction in severity of crashes along there. And the crash numbers have roughly stayed the same, but thank you so much, they're less severe. It's hard to tell up there which ones are A's, et cetera. The red are pedestrian, and so you can also see that prior to that construction era, there were 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 pedestrian, and then after, there have only been 2 pedestrian incidents. And so it's kind of looking at that data, and I'm saying, like, well, even if the overall crashes are roughly the same, there may be less severe, and our most vulnerable users are experiencing fewer incidents with vehicles. So that's a piece of what I was looking at when I was writing my memo. I hope that helps.
Well, it helps a little bit, except I'm confused now about the pedestrian issue. I thought the whole issue was that we had increase in incidents involving pedestrians, and that's why engineering was advocating for the replacement of the all-way stops. So yes or no, there's been a decrease in pedestrian incidents or not?
There has not been an increase in pedestrian-related crashes. Early on in the first year after the project, I was reporting a decrease in pedestrian-related crashes, though as time has gone on, I'm more confident just saying that the rate of pedestrian crashes is essentially the same as what it was before the project.
Do we see more pedestrians on that corridor like we see cyclists increases? And do we know if, again, in this case, do we know if it's induced additional pedestrian trips, or is it simply diverted pedestrian trips onto a new corridor?
Yes, specific to pedestrian volumes, I have very little data on that comparing before and after, but the data that I do have would suggest that there are, if anything, actually more pedestrians using the corridor and crossing the corridor even after the stop signs were removed on 7th Street.
So, again, what is the motive then that engineering initially had to replace the stop sign, just 4 stops?
Sure.
In those other locations?
Ultimately, it was because we were seeing an increase in crashes, not specific to pedestrian crashes, but just an increase in crashes. On the graphic we're looking at here, you can see and these are just injury crashes, not total crashes along the entire corridor, but you can see the the columns are taller since the project compared to before the project. So we're just seeing more injury crashes. Most of them you can see are blue in color, which are motor vehicle crashes. So mostly the increase in crashes is related to vehicle-vehicle crashes.
Vehicle to vehicle.
Correct.
I'd just like to remind everybody that we are talking about an ordinance that would only affect the stop sign at 7th and Dunn at this point.
And I would make the point.
Councilmember Ruff, you had another
Thank you.
question?
Well, it's more of a comment in response to your last comment. The justification for this whole project is the whole corridor. So I think talking about, trying to say that we really should only be talking about this intersection is incorrect. The project is the whole corridor. The justification for the investment, all of the proposed changes, or to have to do with this corridor. So I think it's perfectly legitimate to be talking about any aspect, any location along this corridor. That's my position.
Does anybody have further questions about the ordinance?
I have one more.
Councilmember Ruff.
So, Mr. Seaboard, earlier this year, I was under the impression that you had some information and data. You had a presentation to make to council that you were prevented from making because of the procedural maneuvers that went on during the meeting, and you ended up making a presentation that you were intending and prepared to make. Are you prepared to make it tonight? If you're not, I totally understand. You wouldn't have. I didn't give you any advance warning that I might ask, but I'm just wondering, would you be in a position to make it tonight?
Tonight, I'm primarily prepared to answer questions. If a question was to talk more broadly, I could try my best to do that, but I'm here just to answer questions.
Okay, thank you.
Additional questions from council members? All right, we will go to the public. Is there any member of the public who would like to comment on, where were we? Resolution, ordinance 2024-23. You can come up to the podium and state your name for the record, and you'll have up to 3 minutes. If you are following this meeting via Zoom, you can use the raise hand function that's normally located under the reactions button at the bottom of your screen. So we have somebody here in chambers, so come on up and you'll have up to 3 minutes.
Good evening. Excuse me, Joe Davis. It seems to me that there's something about the crashes that we're not talking about. It's vehicles crashing. The data that we're looking at is for vehicles crashing into people, pedestrians, bikes, scooters, skateboards. Councilmember Stossberg has provided wonderful signage direction, which could improve the scenario, but when it comes to pedestrians, they often as not get hit by bicyclists. And that there needs to be signage to warn the pedestrian of the quickly zooming bike or scooter that's going to be coming toward them, because as we all know, bicyclists often do not stop. They just blow right through an intersection. I mean, you got your momentum, you look left and right, and you keep on going. So to protect the pedestrian, we also need to give adequate signage to the bicyclist to look out for the pedestrian. And I'm all for alternative modes of transportation. We should get people to walk more, bike more, scoot more, skate more, however they can get around, that's outside of a car. That's all for the better. But we have to protect the other modist besides just the bicyclist. We have to protect the pedestrian from the bicyclist, the pedestrian from the scooter user, the pedestrian from the skateboarder, not just the cars. So this needs to be addressed with much nuance to ensure that there's safety for everyone, certainly. And I agree with Councilmember Flaherty's remarks that it takes a getting used to when something so new is introduced. Perhaps this is the first in the state of Indiana. It takes a while to get used to this new manner of addressing safety and the flow of transportation. So I don't know what the solution is, but definitely signage is an improvement. But we need to consider all of the modes being protected, not just vehicular modes again versus other modes. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anybody on Zoom who has raised a hand?
There is Chris Sturbaum.
Okay. Go ahead, Mr. Sturbaum. State your full name, and you'll have up to 3 minutes.
Can you hear me, please?
Yes.
Okay, Chris Sturbaum, I want to talk about four-way stop signs. Tampa has introduced 100 four-way stop signs since 2021. This project supports Tampa's Vision Zero mission with the goal of ending deaths and serious injuries in traffic crashes. Tampa's mobility department has added more than 100 of these stops in the roadways, and the experts say one thing about four-way stops: it slows down traffic. And Jeff Speck, who 20 years ago wrote The Walkable City. I'm a new urbanist, and Jeff Speck is one of the gurus of the walkable city, but he's recently written Walkable City Rules. And rule number 76 is replace signals with all-way stops. And his quote is, "This greater safety has multiple causes. No law-abiding driver ever passes an all-way stop sign at more than a very low speed, and there's considerable eye contact among users. People walking and biking are generally waved through." He said in Philadelphia, there was an experiment in 1978. They replaced 462 traffic signals. They reduced the crashes 24%. Severe injury crashes reduced 62%. Severe pedestrian injury crashes were reduced by 68%. And we have very shaky data on our little 7 line, but there has been some deep inspection on this item. San Francisco, Philadelphia, Michigan, Toronto, these were all 2 to 5 year studies involving thousands of intersections. And when they replaced 2-way stops with 4-way stops, they had a injury reduction of 71% on average across these 4 cities. It's really common sense when the traffic is slower, people who elderly and rollers can cross the street more safely, so pedestrians are helped. The bicycles are not going at such fast speed. And I've heard cyclists who always say, I slow down at intersections that I'm concerned about. It's not the end of the world to slow down. And then the worst thing is speeding up traffic without the 4-way stop signs. That is really dangerous. So in line with Safe Streets for All, reducing safety and traffic deaths, the data, which We like to hear the data. It really indicates that four-way stops are the simple, inexpensive, safest solution, time-tested. Thank you.
All right, and we have somebody else here in council chambers.
Hi, Steve Volan. I am very much in support of this ordinance, at the very least for the administrative purpose that it finally codifies the one intersection, all-way stop intersection that everyone agrees to at 7th and Dunn. But I'd like to add you could call it a piece of data, I suppose, because I've looked at this question before when I was answering a constituent's question a couple of years ago about the safety of bicycles. I've heard plenty of people complain about bicyclists being reckless and dangerous and what have you, but a bicycle is 1/100th the weight of a car. It's physically not capable of killing people as easily as an automobile does. And I would challenge anyone to look for the actual data of crashes that involve death or serious injury caused by bicycles. If you go to the National Highway Transportation Safety Association, if you look for data, you'll have a hard time determining the cause of a given fatality or crash. It's so hard to tell because it's almost impossible to isolate a crash that was literally caused by a bicyclist. By a ratio of 100 to 1, those crashes are caused by automobiles. Full stop, automobiles. I mean, it's such a problem that they only track automobiles, and they all but don't track accidents caused by bicyclists, let alone accidents caused by pedestrians who maybe were the instigation for a motor vehicle crash, an automobile crash. It's obvious if you just think about it for a minute, the sheer physical momentum of an automobile. So to have all this fuss over the first dedicated bicycle lane crossing what used to be four-way stop streets, I find it to be histrionics. Again, yes, we are all concerned about crashes, but let's just put the responsibility for those crashes where they almost inevitably are. If anybody wants to demonstrate deaths caused by bicycles in Bloomington, I will be the first person to receive that data happily. But let's not throw out the baby with the bathwater. Thank you.
All right, any other member of the public want to comment? I don't see anybody else in council chambers. Is there anybody else on Zoom? No hands? Okay, thank you. We will come back to council members for final comments or discussion prior to the vote. Are there any comments from council members? Councilmember Ruff.
Well, you know, we're forgetting, I mean, this was an expensive project. The 7-line cost millions. You know, as everybody in here is all in support of safety improvements, particularly for vulnerable users of transportation modes, and everybody pretty much is behind the idea of shifts in mode share. But our funds are limited. We got to make sure we're getting the biggest bang for the buck. And one of my council colleagues earlier said, you know, well, I don't know if it's that important to get a significant increase in numbers and shift in mode share. It's more about, or it's just as much about sort of comfort and ease, and that's great. That's important too. But again, our responsibility is to make sure we're getting the biggest bang for the buck. And our goals, if we're, you know, a lot of the justification for this project is, you know, increases in sustainability, the mode share shift to more sustainable mode, non-motorized modes. You know, so that has to be the major result of this massive investment, this kind of project. And I'm just looking for evidence of it. I'm just looking for, because if we're going to justify spending this kind of money to the public, and the public's paying attention to these costly projects, whether it's the 7 Line or the Hawthorne Weatherstone Greenway. And so I really think we need to be coming up with some real hard data to show it, not just pointing at general ideas. I'd like to ask Mr. Seabour to find a study for me. I don't know what I did with it. I had it, someone sent it to me, and it was legitimate. It was from the university, I think it was from Texas A&M. And it may have been, it was either a PhD dissertation or maybe it was a master's thesis. But it took a hard look at data on whether these separated bike lanes actually are generating the safety for cyclists that is sort of just assumed that they're generating. And it was reviewed by the committee, the academic faculty committee of whoever the student was who was getting it was their dissertation or their master's thesis. And it was very interesting. And I would like if Mr. Seabour, if you could find that study, I'm almost positive it's out of College Station, out of Texas A&M. I'm almost positive. And share that with all council members. Share it with all the council members. I'd really appreciate that. I know we spent a lot of time talking about the corridor itself rather than just this specific intersection, this specific four-way stop. But again, it's a package. Everything we've talked about is justified by the usefulness of the corridor for increasing use and safety of non-motorized transportation and transit and public transit. Though I do know bus drivers. I have a very close personal friend who's a bus driver, and he hates driving that 7th Street corridor now. But anyway, thanks for allowing me to make those comments, and I'm sure we'll be revisiting some of the other intersections in the future.
Other council member comments? Councilmember Stossberg.
Thank you. I just want to thank Mr. Seabour for coming tonight and for sharing information and data with us. I really appreciate it. And I also want to thank my fellow council members, hopefully, for supporting this in advance, for your hopeful support of codifying the stop sign finally, because part of the issue, of course, is the fact that this particular stop sign at Dunn and 7th has been under emergency order. I think that we've had to redo it 3 times. It's a little absurd that it has not already been codified, and I just really appreciate the idea of codifying this one and getting this one out of the way so that then we can have these broader conversations about the rest of the corridor. Because I think those conversations really, really are important to have. And I did also want to address one of the public comments about signage directed at cyclists regarding pedestrians, and say there are actually 2 signs on the 7th Street corridor directing bicycles to yield to pedestrians. They are relatively small signs, and they are located at the transit islands, because at those spaces, there's only a little bit of a crosswalk that only crosses the bicycle lane as opposed to the entire street. And there is that reminder then to cyclists that they are supposed to yield to those pedestrians. I would argue that I had to look really hard to see those signs, and that a different type of signage would potentially be more effective to remind cyclists that they too have to yield to pedestrians. But those are signs that are there and do exist at the corridor. And I also just want to emphasize the importance of balancing our city goals in terms of thinking of this as an efficient corridor for transit and for cyclists, and also in ensuring safety as much as we can for all users. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Any other comments? Seeing none, will the clerk please call the roll on Ordinance 2024-23.
Councilmember Strasburg?
Yes.
Asari?
Yes.
Rosenbarger?
Yes.
Daley?
Yes.
Flaherty?
Yes.
Ruff?
Yes.
Piedmont Smith?
Yes,
Thank you.
and that ordinance is adopted with a vote of 7-0. Next, we will go to the additional period of public comment on items that are not on the agenda. If anybody has a comment to make, you will have up to 3 minutes, and please state your full name and sign in at the podium. If you are joining the meeting on Zoom and have a comment on something that was not on our agenda, you can use the raise hand function that's normally located under the reactions button at the bottom of your screen. And remember that public comment on items not on the agenda can be made either at the beginning part of the meeting or during this segment. So we have somebody in chambers. Go ahead, please.
Good evening, Madam President. Christopher from the Greater Bloomington Chamber of Commerce. I want to start by saying what the Chamber values in its government, which is transparency, collaboration, a commitment to governance that respects the established administrative structure that is Bloomington City government. So I was at the meeting last Wednesday and stayed for an hour and 15 minutes where the police pay was increased. And I normally open up a bottle of wine and watch the rest of it if I do leave early. And this time I went to bed and woke up with several text messages and then seeing that the meeting ran 5 hours and 40 minutes long. And I wonder, with the Committee on Council Processes, if this is an effective way to manage your meetings. What I saw when I watched the meeting as a whole, and I watched it in segments over the course of the next day in kind of a mini-series, astounded me. It was not something I was proud of. It wasn't even embarrassment where you could get some enjoyment or entertainment. It was awkward. I wasn't familiar with this government that wasn't communicating, wasn't collaborating. What we saw was a lot of tension caused by some last-minute amendments. We had several things that just defied logic in how we were treating each other. We are on the same side here. We need to work together on this. And some of that involves sort of working within the confines of the legislative body, which I thought there was what I would call encroachment into the executive. I think when we talk about working on with staff and staffing of the city, which we heard from Michael Shermis, fine staff member that is great, wonderful people, we can't micromanage these things into individual positions is what I saw. We saw some great oversight when it came to public works and where they were getting their funds. We come before you when there's a new position added. I've encouraged you to cut some position. But looking at microcosm of compensation defied both logic and probably the law. And at 5 hours and 40 minutes, everybody was exacerbated by that point. And so I understand why it wasn't as civil as it should be. But we need to do better. I need to do better in this. I mean, we've had some statements about people with their feelings hurt. We need to sort of get over that and not be so questioning anybody's motives. I've had sometimes felt that my motives were questioned on that. I kind of have to turn the page on that. We have work that goes on. We have commitments that we are making. And in this time, especially after the results of last time, we need to be better. All of us need to be better. I thank you for your time tonight. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Is there anybody on Zoom who has raised a hand? Thank you. And I don't see anybody else in council chambers.
Madam President, I just want to speak briefly on the matter of personal privilege related to the previous comment.
Yes, Councilmember Flaherty.
I believe there's a reference to the extent that it was a reference to hurt feelings regarding my statement about the serious breach of order from the deputy mayor earlier tonight. I don't have hurt feelings about that. It's the process, in fact, that I care about. It is very important to draw distinctions between criticizing substance, even strongly, even heatedly, and personal attacks and attacking people's motives. It is a serious breach of order under our rules, and I think it's important to address it. And I just want to clarify, it's not about being offended. It's about the integrity of this body's process. Thank you.
All right, we will move on to matters of council schedule. And I would like, as president of the Common Council, I'd like to call a special meeting of council at 5:30 p.m. next Wednesday, November 13th, to be conducted in executive session pursuant to Section 514, 1.5, 6.1 B2B of the Indiana Code regarding pending litigation. So please mark your calendars for that executive session next week. Then at 6:30 next week, we will have a deliberation session or consensus building activity session. I believe the focus will be on the proposal for a merged Advisory Transportation Commission, as well as discussion of the council's schedule for next year. And then we will have our next regular session on Wednesday, November 20th. Did I miss any scheduling matters, Attorney Lehner?
No, you did not.
Okay. All right. Well, in that case, we can go ahead and adjourn. Thank you.